Meditations with Ryan Slomak.
Hello and welcome to episode 46 of Meditations. I'm your host Ryan Zlomek, and this is a show dedicated to making space for conversations with interesting people just to see what we can learn along the way. On today's show, I'm pretty excited to dig into some local history in upstate New York, talking with Lee Ellen Hickey. She's the writer of Girl in the Glass Coffin, a historical fiction novel about the Tonkin family, specifically Virginia Tonkin, who was famously passed away at a very young age, and her family had sort of a unique way to mourn her. It's lore that has existed within Oswego County and Oswego, New York for a very, very long time, and Lee decided to jump in and explore it. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about her sort of roots in upstate New York, discovering a passion for reading and writing, and then deciding that she wanted to tackle this local story that has just gotten people thinking about what grief can mean for so long. So without further ado, let's talk to this rockin' self-published author. Here is Lee Ellen Hickey. Lee, thanks so much for joining the show. You and I connected several months ago when you were giving a presentation at SUNY Oswego, and I've been excited to just sort of dig into your past. And one of the things that I love doing is just sort of seeing that relationship between how we grew up and where we ended up. And I want to see if we can kind of piece those things together. And I know that you grew up in the booming metropolis of West Monroe, New York. And I was curious about if you could tell us a little bit about like what it was like growing up in that town for people who are unfamiliar with West Monroe. What's going on there? Just give us kind of an overview of West Monroe and things you were excited about when you were a kid.
Sure. Thank you for having me on your podcast, Ryan. I really appreciate you taking the time to follow up with me and have me here. West Monroe is just kind of a little rural area. We grew up in the 80s playing outside, the typical 80s story of just your parents barely even know where you are and you check in and you have to be back before dark, and having fun outside and running and climbing trees and all of those things, and just kind of a nice typical free kind of childhood. My husband actually grew up just a couple miles from me in West Monroe as well, and he's my research guy behind my book. So it's just kind of cool that I knew him in high school, but he was a few years older than me. And it wasn't until later in life that we reconnected, but, just had an idea of who we were from growing up in the same little small town.
Awesome. Well, keeping it in West Monroe for a minute, like you mentioned the 80s, and I have to ask the important question of how big was your hair in the 80s?
I was an 80s hair failure because I have very fine blonde hair. And I used to work so hard with hairspray and my comb to tease it. And I would inevitably have some kind of a weird crack or like it would be lopsided. I was so thankful when the 90s came and the style that I still have basically to this day came back, where I just have kind of like loose hair hanging down. And so that was no fun. I tried though.
So in doing some research on you, like one of the things that we'll talk about is the fact that you never really aspired to be a writer. It just sort of happened. The spark of inspiration came. But you did take a creative writing class in high school that preps you a little bit. I was curious about like what were your sort of like personal interests? You mentioned like playing outside, but like if we were like to take a look at, like high school Lee, what were you spending your time doing? What got you excited?
I love gymnastics. So I was on the high school gymnastics team for Paul V. Moore, Central Square. And that consumed a lot of my time because if I wasn't doing gymnastics, at the gym or in school, I was doing it on the lawn. So I loved that. And I would always tell people I love babies. And so I loved to babysit. And I spent my weekends babysitting to make a little extra money. So then I could do one of my other favorite things, which was go to the mall on the weekend with my friends and have enough money for a slice of pizza, a soda, and to shop the clearance sales in the backs of our favorite stores.
I'm glad, I'm
So,
glad I'm not the only clearance person. You gotta start somewhere.
yeah. I'm still that way. I still am very thrifty and I love thrift stores and clearance sales and all those things.
When you go into a thrift store, what are you trying to hunt down?
Oh, the perfect top or dresses. So, we like to go on our vacations and I wear a lot of dresses on the cruises we go on. So I'm always hunting for dresses that are somewhat disposable. Like I might wear it this cruise, but where am I ever going to wear it again? Or I may not want to wear it the next time. So it's nice to not spend as much money as paying new and just get a good deal on it.
Awesome. This will become the great thrifting podcast soon enough. So, from what I understand, you've worked as is the term direct support professional
Correct.
for a long time. Where you work with an individual and kind of help them around and help them acclimate and figure out the world. And I was curious about how you ended up finding your way into that profession.
Actually, I just stumbled into it by doing some volunteer work with a neighbor that had some developmental delays and disabilities. And so here I would just kind of volunteer and have her over to my home and work with her and help her. And her mom said, you could make money doing this. And so she set me up with the same company that her daughter was getting resources through. And I was able to get connected with the individual that I work with now, and I've been doing it ever since. And I just love it.
And what kind of stuff do you guys like to do?
Oh, we're everywhere. We go out in the community. We're always either going shopping. He likes thrift stores as much as I do. Um, we go to different parks. We sometimes go all the way up to Alex Bay to see the big ships on the St. Lawrence River. And we just are always out and about doing fun things. On Wednesdays, we go to this place called The Hub, where other people with intellectual and developmental disabilities meet to play bocce ball or basketball or do crafts together. So that's our Wednesday thing. And he's really like a part of our family, the individual that I work with. And I've been with them, like I said, for over a decade. So it's just great because he sort of has two families, his family, and then he spends time with me and mine.
Oh, that's really nice. I just think there's something to be said about like in other interviews I've read of you where you talk about yourself as sort of like an empathetic writer. Like that's
Mm.
the perspective you come from, that like to do that work you have to be, obviously you have to be patient, you have to be understanding, you have to be thoughtful, you have to be thinking ahead, you have to be willing to, most importantly, see the world through somebody else's eyes, and
Yeah.
figure out where those blind spots are and figure out where those strengths are. And I'm just really intrigued with sort of that process. Like that field is one with often high turnover, and to
Mhm.
stay with somebody for 10 years, I think it's to be applauded, and it's a really I don't know, like it's an important part of the developmental process for these individuals.
Thank you. It's very rewarding. I guess that's all I can say. If you're doing it right, I think, and it's just as rewarding for you as it is for the individual and their family. So it's just something that when I fell into it, I felt just this is for me. This is what I love to do, and I can't imagine doing anything else other than what I'm doing. So
Awesome. So, I think the other thing it points to, Lee, is that you're somebody who immerses yourself in everything. So if you
yes.
find something you're excited about, you jump into it. And you're truly an immersive part of the Oswego community. And I know that I believe you got married in 2017 and moved out that way, if I understand timelines correct. And I'm curious about like your relationship with Oswego. Like, what is it about Oswego that you find to be a welcoming and exciting and sort of I don't know, curious place?
Yes. Well, you were close. 2016. I actually did the last day of 2016, December 31st. My husband and I got married. And really, he was the one that helped integrate me into Oswego. I didn't think he would ever get me out of Camden. That's where I lived when we met. And I just loved the village feel of Camden. I loved the old Victorian homes that were there. And I used to tell him all the time, there's no way I'm leaving Camden. Well, he started inviting me on dates to Oswego, and he would walk me around downtown, and we'd go on these side roads next to the park where these big, gorgeous, historic Victorian homes were. And I said, oh my gosh, this is kind of like a big Camden, but it's got a movie theater and it's got this and it's got that. So when he proposed and we started looking at homes, we just fell into Oswego and it felt right. And he's the one that has more of the history behind him. So he went to SUNY Oswego and majored in history. And he just is a natural thing to want to learn more about where he is. And so when we bought this house, and it's a historic home built in 1886, he wanted to do the research on it. So it kind of started there. He did the research on our home, found out who used to live here. We reconnected with them and had them over to our home. Here they are in their late 80s and early 90s, and they're walking through their childhood home. But it was as enriching for us because we're learning all these things we wouldn't have known had they not told us, like where the second staircase used to be and those types of things. So then, he started immersing himself in more of the other local history and sharing these things with me that was intriguing. So we'd go on the haunted history tour, which is here in Oswego, where it takes you by the mansion and tells the story of the girl in the glass coffin. Then we went on the cemetery tour, which is a little bus tour that takes you through the cemetery. Now it goes by the mausoleum, and it touches again on the story of the girl in the glass coffin. So he had shared the story with me, and then I learned more about it from those things. And just that little piece of intrigue always kind of stayed in the back of my mind, you know. And it was really his research and getting me interested in what he was researching that pulled me in to where all of a sudden it got me going, doing a little bit of my own research and digging around. So it's kind of a team effort.
I love it. Before we jump into the book, did your house from 1886? One of the things that I found fascinating is that you write this book from the about a thing that happens in the late 1800s while you're living in a house that's built in the late 1800s. What sort of cool narratives did you guys discover about the house while you were digging into research on it?
Well, one of the fun stories is that 5 siblings grew up in this house, and they told us the story that they used to say that there was a secret room somewhere in this house and they had to find it. So, their parents were busy and they went and got tools. They got a crowbar and they got a hammer, and they decided they were going to go find this hidden room. They decided to start in the attic. So they picked a spot on the attic floor and they just started hammering through. And sure enough, they came to a room and they're like, "Oh, here's the room. It's our secret room." And then they go, "Oh, it's mother's room." So they had literally broken through the ceiling of their mother's bedroom and left a mess on the bed that they made the mistake in cleaning that up, because then maybe the parents would have thought it happened accidentally, but an accident doesn't clean up its own mess. So that was one of the most fun stories that we learned. And when we get talking about the book, in chapter 2, we actually put an Easter egg in there of our own, which is our house makes an appearance. And it's very plausible, the way that we weave it in there. So that was fun. If you don't mind, if I just could step back real quick, because you had mentioned earlier, and I didn't really expound on the fact that I only took the creative writing class in 11th grade. One thing though was I was an avid reader, and I did love to write poetry and things like that. But I really think it's the reading that helped me immerse myself into kind of the written word and the different ways that authors would play with vocabulary and different nuances of speaking through the written word, that I absorbed so much. I really think that's basically where I got any writing skill that I can attribute to, is through reading. And other than just having fun with it, I was never serious about writing.
Well, Lee, it's like you looked into my notes, because literally one of my questions was about what your literary influences are. So we'll stay in this spot for a second. Like,
Okay.
I'm also a firm believer that like you have to be willing to experience the medium that you want to create in, whether it's, like I'm going to watch films critically to make movies, or I'm going to listen to music critically to record my own record, or I'm going to read a lot in order to understand structure and narrative. What types of things did you gravitate to as a kid when you were reading a lot? And especially now, like what kind of stuff do you like to read?
I started out with, I guess my best-selling author would have been, oh goodness, now can I think of it? Well, I used to read a lot of the Twins book. I'm sorry, I can't think of it off the top of my head. Sweet Valley Twins. I started with them. And then I advanced to VC Andrews, which was quite a big step, maturity wise. And I really liked a lot of her books. And then as I got older, I started really just gravitating naturally toward, and it's going to make sense, historical fiction. I just really love reading about the Holocaust. One of my favorite authors is Ellen Marie Wiseman, who wrote The Orphan Collector and The Lost Girls of Willowbrook, where she takes something that happened historically that was pretty tragic and brings it to life in a way that we can kind of experience and understand by weaving in a fictional story and fictional characters associated with it. And I fell in love with her writing and starting reading her books. And she really was a big inspiration for me. And actually, I'd even private messaged her. I liked her on Facebook and became friends with her on Facebook, and have asked her a few questions along the way of advice, and she's been really helpful. So she was very inspiring to me. One time she shared something on her Facebook page that said 97% of people who start to write a book don't finish it. And of the 3% that do, only 1.7% of them, or 1.6%, go on to have it published. And for me, reading that didn't deter me or make me feel like, oh, there's this mountain. No, I was like, oh, that's a piece of cake. I know I'm going to finish this. I know I have that motivation in me to do it. And now it's just a matter of that next percentage, is climbing that little mountain to figure out how to get this published. So she was just so inspiring to me. And I have to give a lot of credit to her for being a good influence in that way.
And for listeners at home who want to check her out, can you say her name again?
Yes, it's Ellen Marie Wiseman, and she's a New York Times bestselling author. She's excellent.
Cool. So in Oswego, there's a lot of lore. You've
Mm-hmm.
got Fort Ontario, which was one of the, I think, only the second place other than Ellis Island that could welcome immigrants in. There's all these historic homes and historic narratives that sort of, reside within town. But for people who are unfamiliar with Oswego, New York, because we have listeners all over the world, like, can you give just a Cliff Notes explanation of what the lore is for Virginia Tonkins?
Yes. So the lore is that, she was kept in a glass coffin in her home for a long time. And there was rumors associated with it that she was propped up, her casket was propped up in the window so she could see her friends going to and from school. And then there was a rumor that her mother would put a plate of food at the dinner table for her, but then make some flimsy excuse as to why she couldn't come down and eat. So the rumor had it a little bit more fantastical than what we believe the truth behind it was. And I actually address those rumors and give them a plausible foundation in my book. But that's kind of the fun of it for all the local children and people that spread the story around. And those stories are still told to this day on the Haunted History Tour. They'll talk about the fact that it said that her casket was propped up in the window.
Yeah, and she died at the age of 10 in 1899 of appendicitis, right? And her family, she was like the
Yes.
beloved child, and kept her, in this interred tomb in their house for over a year. And until eventually they put her in the mausoleum, in town that people can kind of still go see. But it's just, there's something to be said about the sort of, I don't know, cryptic nature of stories that we're drawn to. Like, it's a fascinating story about, not wanting to let go of the memory of someone that you've lost. In a very visual, statute kind of way. But we as like residents, are just like, oh, this just happens to be a town of some rich people that their, daughter died and they decided to basically create a statue of her in her home for a year. Like, it's just an interesting, I don't know, juxtaposition versus like the exciting tales that we have that you write about in your book. Like, I don't know how I'm trying to say this, but like, there's I find it interesting that like it starts off as this narrative that's just kind of like the creepy story that like kids tell each other, or where you can go and you can see something of it in town, and then makes its way into your narrative as this, here's an opportunity for me to really explore family dynamics and like how vibrant this child's life was before her, unfortunate, like, abrupt passing.
Yes. And to your note about her being like a favorite child, she was known as their favorite, which is weird to us because we don't declare that we have favorites, at least most of us, of our children, but it was something they would put right in the paper. Oh, there was other families that had who they would call their favorite child. And that's just kind of an interesting thing. But also for us to think about having our child in a glass coffin in our home is so out there, just so macabre and so strange to even consider. But if you just roll it back and think about from their perspective, it wasn't unusual for them to have the deceased in their home for several days on display because that's where they had their funerals. So this wasn't as far reaching as it is for us. When we have our people that are deceased, of course, they're taken by the coroner, they go to the funeral home, they're dealt with right outside of our home, and we go to a funeral home for that, or a church. But for them, they were already going to have her body in the home for several days anyway. And sometimes if they were waiting for family to travel from out of state, it could be up to a couple weeks. So it wasn't that much further of a stretch. Also, one of the things that was different back then, or just coming into kind of being more typical, was embalming. That wasn't something that they did before then. And embalming was something only really the rich could afford. But what does it do? It preserves the body. It gives the body, plumps the skin and makes the body look better. Of course, they would have had the money to have makeup put on her and have her dressed beautifully and her hair done. So then again, she would have looked like a sleeping child and would have been that much harder to let go of from the mother's perspective. And that's definitely one of the things they also really try to bring to life in the book is grief, and how different people handle grief differently and just what an effect it can have on someone's life.
Awesome. So let's talk about writing the book, shall we?
Sure.
From what I understand, it was something where you had thought about kind of writing something for your kids, just as like a
Mhm.
little story to have, and then it sort of got its hooks into you. Tell me a little bit about how this process kicked off.
Yes. So I was reading outside aloud to my son, who was 12 well, 11 at the time. And I could just see he wasn't really paying close attention to what I was reading. And also as I was reading, again, there's that kind of relationship I have with written word and just enjoying it. And I was just feeling in that moment, like, I think I could do this. I think I could write and bring a story to life like this. And then I started thinking, well, what could I write about that might actually hold my son's attention? And that was the first story that came to mind because it's just held so much intrigue. So I thought of initially just writing a short story about it, kind of expounding on all those fun rumors and running in that direction with it. And I sent my husband a text message on August 16th of 2023. And I said, I'm going to do some creative writing and it's going to be about the girl in the glass coffin story. And something in me felt, I can't even describe the feeling, but I took a screenshot of that message that I sent my husband and I started a little thing in my gallery on my phone that was entitled Creative Writing because there was something in me that felt I was going to want to remember the day that I decided to do it. The inspiration was that strong. And so he jumped right on board and being the history loving guy that he is, he started pulling up articles for me to use for this little book. And as soon as he started really digging and bringing up all these other things that had happened that was associated with the family, and as soon as the family started to feel more real to me, there was no way I was going to write about them in a way that just more exploited the rumors and went the fun side of it. It didn't feel fun anymore. It felt very serious. And it felt like they deserved integrity. And just from that moment on, I wanted to bring their story to life with integrity and as much as I could for each character involved.
Did Brian know that he was going to be outsourced as a researcher when you sent him that text message?
No way. There's no way, but I'll tell you what, he loved it. And he just started printing these newspaper articles and bringing them home every day. And I started putting them in a stack, which is now really thick. And I would put them in chronological order, like a timeline. And then I just kind of structured, okay, chapter one's going to be about this incident. This is what I have to include here. I made a timeline and I had my needle to my thread that wove the whole thing together, which is a fictional doll that I created. And she starts out in the first chapter and she's weaved through all the way to the very last chapter. And that's kind of how I wove the whole timeline together. And he was there every step of the way. We'd have lots of discussions in the car where I would kind of throw ideas and bounce ideas about a direction that I'd want to go. And we'd banter about it. And it was really great because it helped refine my writing. It would help, maybe if I was going a little bit too far this way, he'd bump me back, oh, you maybe don't want to go that route. And it really had just helped refine. So he was a real great support to me in writing it.
That's awesome. Like obviously the research process was kind of split up between the two of you. Like
Mhm.
what sort of resources did you use for your research? Like where did you go to kind of find things? What sort of archives or articles or things did you discover along the way that just like were gold that you didn't know you were going to come across?
Well, there's one in particular that was game changing for the book, and that was Fulton Postcards. It's a website where it has archives of newspaper articles going way back to the 1800s, and you have to have patience and I guess some skill. My husband definitely learned his way through that, and he's teaching me, and I'm still learning just how to go from one article and pick something out of that you can then use as a keyword to search to the next thing. And it was really like hunting for different puzzle pieces and clues to then be able to put together the whole puzzle to create the picture that became the book, because there are so many other things that happened with this family, freak accidents and huge events like being blackmailed for ransom, and there's a murder that's associated with the family, and all these things that you would never know if you just stuck to your main source of research, which is just about the girl in the glass coffin. So he just got really good at kind of finding these bunny trails and seeing where it would take him, and it created a really nice put together picture in the end.
That's awesome. And you mentioned it here. You talked about in another interview, setting up a timeline and developing a structure for that. So, and you mentioned also that there's a doll that makes its way through the book as kind of a plot device. Tell us about the way in which you structured the novel, like the intentionality of the timeline in relation to the way in which you structured the story.
I wanted it to be as chronological as it could, but there was one story that and it was about one of the main character, arguably, is Harold, Virginia's older brother. So many events happen with him, and he kind of gets into some controversial situations and things along the way. And so there was this one event that I knew was going to happen to him, that had happened to him actually before the timeline started with my book, that I wanted to allude to for the first few chapters, and then go back in time to kind of, bring forth what happened, why he's got some emotional disturbances and issues like that, what maybe had happened to him. And really, it was the way of fostering some of that empathy for Harold, because you're going to need that empathy if you still want to like him by the end of the book, which some people don't, but some people do, which was kind of my goal, is to put the humanity out of people, all of their mistakes and blunders, but maybe understand what was behind it. So that was the one time that I stepped out of chronological order, was to tell the story of a tragic event that happened involving Harold, where we went back a few years. Besides that, it was really just each event as it kind of happened in time, and how one kind of transpired into the next. Also, there's an undercurrent, again, of grief. So Virginia is by far not, only one death out of several in the book. And it's really about how different people handle grief differently, but how it all kind of comes into play and affects each other in their relationships over a period of time.
You mentioned finding Fulton postcards and that being the sort of like, I don't know, major win for your research. And I'm curious, like, what specifically you found within that source.
I think that is where we found most of our information, really right down to it's just, you can find newspaper articles that cover all the trials, if they went to court, really like word for word. Um, Sometimes the story would be told in different perspectives, and we'd actually have to do more research. For example, it was really hard for us to pinpoint how old Virginia was. The stories are, some say she was 10, some say she was 11 when she died. Well, the newspaper articles even conflict. So if we'd have based our information that we put in the book by one newspaper article, we would have had a lot of mistakes. It really took finding several articles to confirm certain pieces of information before we would feel confident to go forward. And really, the only way we found out what her real age was the plaque in the mausoleum. That was the confirmation, because there were so many conflicting articles out there. But they're just full. And really, newspaper articles back in the 1800s and 1900s, early 1900s, it was like a tabloid. It would be the same as a Spy and Inquirer today. They would talk about things like who was in town visiting, who's got a case of the grip, which I think is like a croup or some kind of a cough. Who was going here and doing this and that social event. And of course, they love to talk about controversy, especially surrounding the prominent, very wealthy families, which the Tonkins were. So it just makes sense that, there were several newspaper articles that went into great detail surrounding anything that happened with that family. So really, it was like a treasure trove of information that we could delve into just through that website alone.
Tell me a little bit about the development of the personalities in this, because one of the things that I'm curious about is there's sort of a line between historical fiction and creative nonfiction. And I'll be
Yes.
upfront that when I started reading this, I was expecting more of a creative nonfiction approach than a historical fiction approach. And it was interesting to like jump into it and very clearly see these are the landmarks that are factual. And then these are the places where like, I wonder how much she embellished here, or I wonder how much is based in fact. And I'm curious about like how you came to terms with, like the characters in the book and the sort of personalities that they put forward.
That's a really good question. So I did use empathy, and there's a lot of me and people that I know that I've put into these characters, because it's all about, my perspective, but in using empathy with what might I have done, or what might somebody who I know that seems to have that kind of a personality have done in those situations. I knew I was taking a lot of liberty by putting words in people's mouths, and kind of labeling intentions and things like that. So I definitely put a disclaimer in the beginning of the book that I took liberties, that there's no way to know what the dialogue really was or what somebody's intention or attitude was in response to some of these things that happened, but just using the most plausible thought process that I could in, okay, it makes sense that what happened to Harold would have caused him future emotional and internal struggles because it was so traumatic. There are some things that we just kind of know and have learned through our own society today. So I used a lot of that, but there's definitely things that I put from my own experiences into there and just hoped that I did good. And what was really fun is after I wrote the book, finding out how many things that I was accidentally right about, that I wrote about guessing, that turned out to be, I pretty much hit the nail on the head with some things.
That's cool, because the other thing that's interesting about this book, and I want to talk about publishing it and getting it out there in a moment, but your turnaround on this was remarkably quick. Like some people take years. George R. R. Martin still hasn't finished the last book from the last decade. You turned this thing around in a couple months, from what I understand.
Yeah. I had gotten this laptop that's sitting in front of me right now on Black Friday for like $150 or $200 in probably 2022, just with the intention of just to have, it'd be nice to have a little laptop and not have to use the desktop. And so when I had that feeling of inspiration that day, I basically went to Microsoft Word, opened up a blank page. And all I can tell you is that the second my fingertips hit the keys, it was like this thing that I did not know was in me came out, and it was an incredible feeling. I absolutely loved it. I can't describe it as anything, but I used the word delicious. It was like, oh, I didn't know it could feel this way. And the words seemed to just pour out of me. I never felt like I had writer's block. I never second guessed and went back and like, oh, I'm going to take out, I think I took out one paragraph. I'm not kidding. One paragraph I deleted. One I backspaced on, only backspaced a couple sentences because I learned something new through an article and I went a bit of a different direction. But literally the way it is written is the way I wrote it from beginning to end. And it took me exactly 3 months. I started writing on August 23rd, about a week after I said I was going to. And then I completed my first official rough draft on Thanksgiving Day of November 23rd, 2023. And I don't know how to describe it except that it just felt like it really did come very natural to me. And it was something I enjoyed very much and had a really good time with.
I like the fact that you finished it just in time to reward yourself on Black Friday.
Yes. Yes.
I'm curious about editorial process. Like, so it sounds like the book is the book. It came out. It's with minor edits from you from a content perspective. But did you have a series of people who read the book after you had finished it to kind of get some feedback on or figure out if there were grammatical errors, anything like that, before you put it to publication?
Yes, I actually had my professional pre-readers, which was my mom, my aunts, a couple of them, and my grandma. She passed away this past July, and I would just feed them chapter after chapter, and they would give me their feedback. But I also have a good friend, Bill Warford, who is my editor, who I happened to meet that summer that I started writing at a neighborhood get together, and come to find out he has some pretty good credentials behind him. And he used to be an English teacher, and he was a reporter for Valley News in California and also here in New York. So he had written several columns, and he was a columnist. So he had the experience and ability to do editing, and he said he would. He said he'd take a look at it. And really, this was my first credible professional opinion about my book. I said, well, I'll send you a few chapters, because there's just kind of conversation like, oh, I'm writing a book if you'd look at it for me. And he's like, okay. So I sent him, I think, the first 4 chapters. He got back to me and he said, I was just going to sit down and take a peek at, your first chapter and get a sense of your writing style. And I was supposed to be at the gym at 1. He said, here it is, 2:00, and I couldn't put it down. I just want you to know that you've got a good thing here, and it looks like you could have a career in writing, and you keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a really great job. And I cried when I got that feedback, because it's one thing to hear great things from your mom and your aunts and your grandma, but it's another to hear, something positive like that and really reaffirming from somebody with his credibility. So that was my first real thrust forward in confidence And so I did. I just kept doing what I was doing and giving him the article or giving him the chapters. And there was very little that he wanted to change other than grammatically. He definitely gave me some great pointers, and I'm still learning and from him and implementing some things. Like maybe I would have a tendency in the beginning to have some run-on sentences, and he taught me the benefit of just having two sentences and maybe the second part of the sentence being a little bit of a punchline, punch sentence. So he's been very instrumental in all of this.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I'll be blunt. Like, I've read a lot of self-published things, and like there's a polish to the work in your book that I don't often see. Something as simple as like within the first chapter, usually you figure out like somebody has two periods in a row, or like they spelled something wrong or whatever. And this book seems to have been combed through really nicely.
Well, thank you. I always feel like there's just something little that I could change, but I was warned that I'm always going to want to, improve it. And at some point you got to just let it go and be what it is. And there's going to be tiny errors, but yeah, Bill did a really good job in the editing aspect. And so I'm actually working on my second book, and he's going to be my editor for this one as well.
Well, that's exciting. Well, let's talk
Mhm.
about you finish Girl in the Glass Coffin, the Tonkin Affairs, and
Mhm.
you decide it needs to be ready for the world. And you
Yes.
decided to go the self-publication route. Tell,
Mhm.
for people listening at home, like if you don't mind kind of getting technical, like how did you settle on which, printer to use and just getting it out in the world, like making sure that you were going to be able to see a result quickly.
The easiest platform, in my opinion, to get it out there is Amazon because it's KDP. So it's Kindle Direct. Oh, goodness. Kindle Direct. I should know this off the top of my head. But anyway, the process for this is you put the manuscript out there, and as long as you have it done correctly, they may fix minor things for you, like say a margin is off. They'll let you know so you can correct it. And that just seems to be the easiest one to kind of get an approval for. And they're really helpful. They give you templates for what you need for your cover, and they give you advice for what fonts to use and what size and margins and all of those things. So that was the route that I went. I needed something that was the most user friendly that I could understand. And I just started watching a lot of YouTube videos and things. It's Kindle Direct Publishing. And just learning as I went. And coming from a place of knowing nothing about Microsoft Word, knowing nothing about formatting, I didn't realize what went into numbering your pages. It sounds easy, right? Well, no, because it has to be in a certain spot. And then on your chapter page, you don't want the heading. So, like every other page might have the name of the title of the book, and then the other page has the author's name, right? But you don't want that on the chapter page. Sounds easy, but it is not. There are so many little nuances, and there was a lot of learning curves for me to learn, a lot of failures, a lot of frustrations. But I would definitely say that was harder for me than writing the book and took just as long. So that's why I didn't get it. Even though I finished in November, that's why it wasn't ready till early February, because it was difficult. But if I can do it, anybody can do it. That's for sure. Because I came into it with zero experience or knowledge.
Well, you got the book out there, and dare I say, you started hustling. Like as soon
Yes.
as the book came out, you found some really creative ways to get it out there. Whether it was throwing tea parties or putting together a lecture series, giving tours of town to show kind of those things off. Like where did that sort of secondary, like, all right, I need to find an audience, sort of series of problem solving challenges come from?
Well, I also paid attention to other local authors and what they were doing. I learned so much. Jim Furfaya is a local author that wrote some really great books about our local weather and different local things. And I went to a couple of his slideshow presentations and sat there and watched how he did it. I worked with him on the side individually with different things, and he mentored me. So I definitely learned a lot from him. And there were also other authors locally that I tapped into their experiences. So that was a biggie. So when I wrote the book and I knew I would want to present it in some kind of a book launch, my husband and I, of course, there's all kinds of pictures associated with the stories and involved with the book. So we put together a little slideshow, and it was so encouraging when there was a standing room only for my first presentation, which was not anything to do with me. Nobody was coming to see Lee Ellen Hickey. Nobody knew who I was. but it showed the intrigue of the story of the girl in the glass coffin, just how many people had heard about this story for years and they wanted to know more. Like that hunger was there. So that was super encouraging. And it gave me confidence too, to talk confidently about what we had learned and to share it with excitement and enthusiasm, because all of these people want to know what you've learned and it's fun to talk about it. So that part really came easy. And I'm really comfortable and confident in person in front of a crowd of people. But I got invited onto Bridge Street to do a little segment there. Well, okay, I invited myself, but they accepted my invitation. And I was live, and I didn't know going into it that I was going to be live. And I'm telling you, my confidence tanked. I could barely breathe. I felt like I was having an internal panic attack. And because my body went into emergency mode, I had very few vocabulary words to tap into in my brain. I barely survived that interview. So that's where I had to learn, okay, I'm good in front of people, but in front of a camera, it feels a lot different.
I give yourself a little credit. I actually watched that interview right before this interview today, just to sort of check it out. And like, I thought it was cool. I've never seen an author or creative interview where not only do you get the perspective from the creator, but like also your kids were there to talk about like their perspective of seeing you go through this, which I just thought provided a really nice insight that because let's be honest, like this book is a family affair, no pun intended. Like it's
True.
it's a whole like family collective. Like the idea comes from reading and needing to finding a way to entertain your kids. It's sucking your husband into the research. Like it is now something that's associated with your family. Like I just thought that was a cool way to really contextualize the book.
The humbling and hysterical truth about my children being on the interview that day is because I panicked and I could not go out there alone. As soon as I found out I was going to be live, they were not dressed for it. They were not prepared for it. We didn't have any pep talks going into it, like sit up straight, no. So there was some slouching and there was some casual outfits, but their support got me through. Honestly, just having them right there grounded me enough. Honestly, I don't know if my voice would have just cracked, if I would have faltered into tears. That's how extreme my anxiety was in that interview. So having them there was such a gift and blessing. I'm so glad they rode with me that day, but it was not pre-planned.
Hey, we work with what we got, right?
That's right.
One of the resources that's in Oswego, New York, and we keep saying Oswego, 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 just for listeners at home who are still a little unclear, it's located on Lake Ontario. It's a town that is growing. A lot of people in COVID realized they kind of wanted to go somewhere quieter where there was developments and there was beautiful views, and they moved themselves there. My employer, the State University of New York at Oswego, is there, where I teach in the computer science department. But the downtown of Oswego just has some of the coolest businesses in any town. Like to the extent where I was doing a previous interview with Chris Clements, who is a sobriety specialist, essentially. And when I just offhandedly mentioned Oswego, he literally stopped me to say, "That place is cool." And I was like, "Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going there." But one of the resources they have is the Rivers End bookstore.
Yes.
And the Rivers End bookstore historically has been really important. I'm beaming in from Syracuse. You're an hour away in Oswego right now. It's actually been really important for Central New York as a bookstore because up until the last 4 or 5 years, it was the only independent new bookstore in upstate New York, between Syracuse and Oswego, to the extent where we would have lecture series in Syracuse and they would be the ones supplying all the books, coming down, doing the book sales or whatever. But they have partnered with you and have sold your books there. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that relationship a little bit between you and Rivers End.
Yes, it started out kind of funny because here I'm kind of nobody. And I'd heard that there's a local author shelf there. So I just think that it goes without saying that I will be able as a local author to put my book on the shelf. So I went into it a little bit presumptuously, but Emil and his wife welcomed me so generously, and they were so supportive and helped me to kind of navigate the process of getting the book in there and on consignment and things. And they were actually really surprised because I had put it out on Facebook that the book was going to eventually, because everybody's like, "Oh, this book is coming out. We want to read about the girl in the glass coffin story. When is this book coming out?" because I just made like this little announcement in early February. Well, I didn't realize that the result was going to be all these people showing up at Rivers End Bookstore looking for the book, that now the owners are saying they have to turn these people away disappointed. No, what are you talking? What book? And so it was kind of funny that I had to go back and edit that and say on this date, from this point on, I just stumbled into all of it. I didn't know what I was doing really. But it was very well received, and they've been great partners with me. And that store is really great. It's such a great asset to our city, and a nice little successful store. It's one of my favorite businesses in town for sure.
And you're humbly just glossing over the fact that it was the #1 seller at the store for several months.
Yes, from what Emil told me, they were selling out quickly, and of course I had to replenish. And he let me know, because I said, "Oh, and how is this compared to other books?" He goes, "Well, no other books are selling this many copies in 1 month, so you're doing pretty good." And that was a big confidence booster for me too. Like, if it can do this well, maybe in other avenues it could as well. So then I went to getting it onto the Barnes and Noble platform, which the way Barnes and Noble works is if you're a self-published author, they don't stock the book for you. Again, it's kind of like at Rivers End Bookstore, where you bring it in and they'll sell it on consignment and sell it and, give you your profit or royalties as it sells. But it was selling so well at Barnes and Noble that they did start going through B&N Press and stocking their own shelves with it. So I don't even have to print them and have them sent there anymore. And they're continuously selling out. So it's very encouraging and exciting to see that happening. And I hope I can stay behind this momentum and keep it going like that, the way it is.
Yeah, and you had mentioned to me before the broadcast that like the book's taken on a life of its own. Like the Tonkin family, like distant relatives, have found the book outside of New
Yes.
York State. And I was wondering if you could tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that.
This is really as incredible of a story as the story in the book. It was several months after I had the book published that I got a private message from somebody. Now, I got to step back to say that there are a lot of Tonkins that live in Oswego, but they're not direct descendants of the Tonkin family from the West Side. So in the late 1800s, there was the Tonkin family from the West Side, and then there was Tonkin family on the East Side that were more middle class. And so there are still descendants of the East Side Tonkins around, and a lot of them would think, "Oh, well, my name's Tonkin. I must be some distant relative." But my husband, being the research guy that he is, looked through Ancestry, and he wasn't making any connections with anybody locally. Now, I will say this: I didn't want my husband to go as far as to find these descendants, because I knew it was a little nerve-wracking for me. I brought a lot of skeletons out of the Tonkin family closet. And even though I did it with as much integrity for each character as I could, there was a lot of exposure there, and some of it wasn't very pleasant. So I didn't want to go that route. I kind of would rather ask forgiveness than permission in this case. And all of a sudden, I get this private message from somebody, and it's a picture of Harold Tonkin, again, the main character's gravestone, which my husband hadn't even found that picture. And it got my attention, like, how does this person have, Harold Tonkin's grave? And then she messaged me and said, "My name is Kathy Tonkin," and, quotes, "Borodino. And Harold was my grandfather." And I just started trembling, and I sent her my phone number, and I'm waiting, like holding my breath for her to call. What is she going to say? What is her reaction going to be? So the first thing I get on the phone with her, and she goes, "I just got to tell you, I love the book and I love you." And so, phew. And she did correct one thing. She goes, "I have one thing to correct." And so we went over that, and I've updated the book with that little correction. And it was something we had kind of come to a plausible conclusion about, that we were a little off on. And as much fact as we can put into the book, the better, as far as we're concerned. So it was worth doing that little tweak. And then the next thing she said to me is, "I have to ask you, how did you know about the doll?" And I said, "No, the doll was fictionalized." And she goes, "Well, every time you'd bring up the doll, I would just go back to my mind's eye as a 7-year-old. And in my grandfather's dining room, there was this bottom drawer in a buffet, and I would open it, and here's this doll, a lot like the one you described, but really old and really worn. But I wasn't allowed to touch it because she was so special. So as I'm reading the book, you keep talking about this doll, and I just couldn't figure out, how did you know about it?" So that was really cool. And by the way she found the book, imagine this. She's just like scrolling on Amazon, and here's this book with her family's last name. And basically all she knew of from what was inside the book was about the story of, Virginia, the girl in the glass coffin. She may have known a little bit about the blackmail letters, but anything else that went on, like, Harold's accident and these different things. There's even a baby, an illegitimate baby in there, that there's a big deal about that. So all these things were so new to her, and it was like she was reading about her family for the first time. So it was just really cool how she fell into it and how warm and accepting she was of the whole thing. Well, then it wasn't until very recently. So I knew Kathy for several months. We had this really great relationship. Well, have. And we invited her to come out in July for a parade because we were doing the Girl in the Glass Coffin float. So Virginia Tonkin, the little girl that died in the book, her favorite color was violet. And her favorite flower was violet. So we did a float all in purple, lavender and violet, and to promote the book. And we dressed like old fashioned, hats. And my husband wore, what's it called? A bowler hat, kind of bringing back that time period. And we invited Kathy and her husband to come be on the float with us. So here our float had an actual Tonkin family member descendant, and it was just great fun. And then it wasn't until just recently that I call them the trio, the Tonkin trio from Tennessee. They're a set of siblings that are a generation out from where Kathy is. So Kathy is Harold is her grandfather. To this set of siblings, he was their great grandfather. And it was a similar story. Like, they had remembered something about their dad telling them about the girl in the glass coffin. And just out of the blue, the youngest Tonkin sibling of the trio did a Google search. Was the story that our dad told us true? Is there any fact to this? And boom, she stumbled upon the book. So they all bought the book, read it, and reached out to me. We had a Zoom just like we're doing here, where we just talked about all this stuff, like how we came to find out all this stuff. And they're over the moon excited about their family history being brought to life. Nobody's offended or upset. They love how I was able to portray everyone, and they don't feel like it was unfair. So that was a big relief for me. And we're having this big tea party fundraiser, and the trio from Tennessee, there's two women and a man, are coming here in New York in May for the first time. And Kathy's coming back from Connecticut, and they're meeting for the first time here in May. So, and I have a little surprise for them that the city is doing, but I can't tell you now because I don't want them to know. But it's something really cool that is the city welcoming the Tonkins here back to the home of their descendants.
All right, everybody should know that Lee is the queen of Easter eggs. We've got another one coming forward. Well, that's awesome. So, so the book has existed, for a while now, and has found a consistent audience, which is pretty impressive. And you've started to work on your next project. And I guess what I'm curious about is, like, how do I say this? How has your approach to writing changed now that you're starting a new project?
Well, I feel like I still write with the same tone, kind of like I think it's called an omniscient third person. So it's almost like I'm the all-knowing, but I'm not, but I pretend to be, as to bring, everything to life the way that I do, but from kind of a back perspective. So I can tell you what people are thinking, what they're feeling, what's happening, but individual. So I'm not just stuck in one character. So that's kind of my style. So I don't do that differently. But what I am finding is that already what I've learned from writing the first one, I do feel like this one is a little bit more refined already with my writing. And I've had several of pre-readers say they think it's going to even be better. So I don't know. I hope it's as good, at least. If it is, then I'll be happy. But I'm really enjoying it. And I feel like the same feeling of inspiration. I wasn't sure if this was going to ever happen again. I was like, the stars just aligned for the first one. Could it possibly happen again? But I feel like it is. I feel like we've had some cool coincidences with this one along the way, so similar to the way we did with the first book, that make me feel like I'm on the right track.
Can you give us a tease as to what this next book is?
Oh, yes, I can tell you. It's The Murder of Cora Sweet, which I touch on in chapter 18 in Girl in the Glass Coffin. It's definitely relative to the family, what happened with them. But I wanted to bring that whole story to life because there's so much more to it. And her murderer, Henry Manzer, was executed at Auburn Prison, and he was in orphanages in his childhood. And there's just so much more of a story to be told with that. So I want to bring that whole thing to life as well.
So one of the other things that you're doing to promote the book is planning for bus tours this summer around
Yes.
Oswego. And to Oswego's credit, it's a town that has put a lot of money into tourism. In recent years, with an indoor water park and a children's museum,
Mm-hmm.
and this isn't not technically tourism, but there's an amazing candy store. Which
Yes.
bring people from around. And I'm curious about your little slice of that. Like, tell us about your book tour, or sorry, your bus tours and what that consists of.
It was kind of an on-demand thing because when people read the book, they naturally just now they're interested. Now they're hooked. They want to see the mansion. They want to see the mausoleum. But what I wanted them to know is there's so much more to see associated with the book than just the mansion and the mausoleum. There's scenes of accidents. There's other historic homes that are involved. There's where the businesses were that the millionaire, where he made his fortune. Church where this main incident happened in chapter 2, which, by the way, that's where I stick in my Easter egg of our home. And so even on the tour, I point out our house because one of the characters is brought to the front porch of our house in that scene in chapter 2, which was very plausible because the church they were at was in the parking lot behind us. So it was a really fun, plausible way that I could plug in our own home and kind of connect us to that history. But then, we travel all the way to Scriba to see the grave of Cora Sweet, the girl that dies in chapter 18, and her monument, and see where her murder took place or the proximity of it. So there's so many other places, and it makes for a really rich and engaging tour. And the whole way on the tour, I'm unraveling the fact for and fiction for everyone. So kind of explaining what I fictionalized, what historical evidence my fiction was based on, because that was important to me. I didn't just want to make up anything willy-nilly. I wanted it to be plausible and to make sense and to be actually possible. So I was very intentional with anything that I did make up. So, for example, there's a scene of an altercation that happens in the book. I don't know where this altercation took place or what it entailed, but I do know that it was between the two women. I understand what the conflict was behind them. So I just had to bring a scene to life that would have been plausible. So, based on the fact that they wouldn't have had an altercation in church unless it would have been in the Inquirer, right? The local newspaper, if it had all the details, and I would be able to tell everybody exactly what happened. So I chose the cemetery as the place for this altercation. So I just explained my reasoning and my motives behind the fiction that I did place in the book. And it just makes for really great conversation and kind of helps people understand from the beginning of the book to the end, how I was able to kind of weave those things together, truth and fiction, and make it plausible.
That's super cool. And how we'll talk about where to find you online momentarily, so people can kind of get some information about that. But like, how long do these tours last? How many do you hope to do this summer? Like, give us some details about that.
The tour is about 1 hour, give or take a few minutes. And we start in Oswego and we go to Scriba, and then we come back to Riverside Cemetery to the mausoleum, and it ends there. What was the other part of the question?
How many of them do you plan on doing? Is this like a one-off?
Oh, okay.
It's going to happen a lot.
Well, last year, I think we did 4 days of them, and they were all sold out. And each day I would have back-to-back tours. So there'd be one bus of 28 people that would go for the first hour, and then the second group would come. So, almost 60 seats. And I did it like 4 times. So, and they were sold out quickly. So I would like to maybe do that again this year for maybe new people that have read the book that didn't have a chance to do the tour before. But I'm also super busy and trying to write this book too. But it is something fun to do.
Cool. So, just to wrap things up, since we're talking about Oswego tourism, and people, hearing this, like, now they all want to come to Oswego and they want to see the mausoleum and they want to, read your book and kind of get that experience. What other things do you like to do in Oswego, or do you like to show off that do not relate to the book directly?
Oh my goodness, Brightbeck Park is right at the top of my list. It's just a beautiful, iconic park on the water, and there's so many things to do, and just the sunsets at night there are out of this world. In fact, National Geographic at one point voted it number 2 best in the world for sunsets. We also have some amazing restaurants. Let's see, we have the rooftop restaurant there, and of course we have the Texas Roadhouse now, which is fun. Of course, all the little shops, and we have a little visitor center. We have our beautiful little historic theater that we love to go to. So there's just so much to see and do here in Oswego, and beautiful places to walk. The river walk is beautiful. It's right down by the water, and people fish there and just have lunch or sit on benches. I love our city. It really, truly is beautiful.
I feel like there's a lot of towns where you show up and you have to fill your time with events. Like that's the only way to take it in. And I feel like Oswego is like one of the rare uh, experiences where like to come and to just say I'm going to take in the ambiance is is probably the right way to do it.
Yeah. And for little or no money, you can have a whole fun and rich day just exploring the area. And, I do want to mention that the Historical Society, the Oswego County Historical Society, has been so supportive and helpful with some information, some pictures that we wouldn't have had access to, and just supporting us with different events and getting behind us. So we've become members, and they have the beautiful Richardson Base House Museum right here on the east side in Oswego, where you can, so book fans can go there, and if they want to get a little glimpse into what life was like for the Tonkins and how their homes may have been decorated and things, walk into the Richardson Bates House Museum, and it'll give you kind of a flavor of that. So there's that. And of course, you mentioned earlier the fort, and where that was the refugee camp for people that were saved from the Holocaust. And that was the only place. And I think there was 998 or something like that souls that were saved by being able to come here. So there's that little museum there. We've got the Marina and the Maritime Museum, and so many really inexpensive, enriching things to do here for sure.
Awesome. Well, for people who want to find out more about your book, who want to find out more about you, where are the best places to find you online?
Definitely. You can go to girlintheglasscoffin.com, and I have a website that would lead you to where to buy the book through Amazon. You can also go to barnesandnoble.com, and you can purchase the book there. It's flying off the shelves in Clay and at Destiny, but that's because it's local. I don't really have a distribution to get it out there further. I would love to. I'm in the works of looking for an agent or a publisher to kind of take the baton now and run with it, because I think it's proven itself sales-wise for now. And also I have a Facebook page that's Girl in the Glass Coffin. That's kind of a personal page that just keeps updated on events and personal things that I'm doing. But then there's also the business page, which is Girl in the Glass Coffin, the Tonkin Affairs on Facebook, which that's where you might buy the tickets to the bus tours and see different events like that are coming up.
I love it. And I always want to leave room at the end of the show just for, to see if there's anything that we haven't covered that is kind of on your brain. So is there anything on your noggin that you want to share?
Yeah, just a little bit more about the family and how enriching it's been to meet some of the members of the Tonkin family, the relationships that we've made here. And then they also have pictures that they had inherited that they didn't realize. They were just like in boxes that really didn't mean anything to them at the time. But they've uncovered the only photographs in existence of Virginia, because up until now, we had only had pictures that we could find from newspaper articles, which the cover of my book is like a very, very grainy picture of Virginia Tonkin, because that's all that we had access to. Well, they have an actual photograph of Virginia and her face. And also we discovered through their pictures that the Tonkins had professional photographs taken of the mausoleum when it was first built. And what we learned was that they originally had Virginia's face in the window as the angel in the stained glass window. What happened was the window was broken for decades. A bat had gotten in the mausoleum and broken out through the window, and it broke through the face of the angel. So years later, when the Riverside Cemetery wanted to use perpetual care to replace that, they had no template to go by, nothing to compare it to. So they just put a random angel face, and they repaired the window beautifully. And it was very nice to make it whole again. But what we discovered, and it being Virginia's face, well, first of all, that became initially the clearest image that we have of Virginia. So then we wanted Virginia back in the window. What's so important about that is Mrs. Tonkin, Mr. and Mrs. Tonkin's intention behind the build of the mausoleum, how much it pertained to their closure and their grief that they needed her face to be in the window because she was known for being afraid of the dark, which was their reasoning behind not burying her in the first place or having her interred immediately in the first place. So having her face in the window was very intentional to kind of have her in that light and perpetually looking out. And then having that inner door where it would open at the top with just bars so you could see inside and let the fresh air and light in. It was just really important to them to not have her closed up in there and feel like she was just entombed. And so we want it back. And that's what this fundraiser is all about in May, is restoring that stained glass window. So right now it's out and it's at Brennan Stained Glass being repaired. And we're trying to just help offset the cost because Kathy Tonkin, Berardino, and her husband are covering the main chunk of that. But we're trying to do whatever we can to offset this cost and be a part of restoring that history that feels so important to us. So a lot of our Tonkin fans are going to be there that also want to be a part of that restoration process and getting her face back in the window.
Well, that sounds great. So it sounds like if you need an excuse to visit Oswego and to help with, be a part of this narrative, that, checking in with Lee's amazing work and coming out to these benefits in May is going to be glorious.
I also want to give a shout out to Justin White, who is the former Oswego County historian and Oswego town historian, who was absolutely valuable in my learning the social norms of what the time period was like with the things associated with the family as far as what their daily lives were like and their lifestyles. And if it wasn't for him, I would have had a lot more research to do. And he spent hours with me on the phone, just kind of explaining things to me in a way that I could absorb and understand and then relate into my writing. So I wouldn't have wanted to do it without Justin. He was an incredible resource for me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the show, Lee. This was an absolute pleasure.
Well, I appreciate you having me very much. Thank you.
Thanks again to Lee Ellen Hickey for coming on the show. It was such a joyous conversation, and the book is a tremendous piece of work. So if you're listening and you're just even the slightest bit intrigued, go check out girlintheglasscoffin.com. Look on Amazon or Barnes & Noble for copies of the book. Or if you're in Oswego, New York, check out our local bookstore and go pick yourself up a copy. It's probably even autographed. But Lee, it's a just tremendous piece. It's a tremendous testament to your research, and I just can't say enough good things about this awesome first novel. So give it a look. It's going to be worth your time. Speaking of worth your time, on May 7th, we have our next episode 47, coming with Jessica Montgomery. Jessica is the photographic mastermind behind Stay Fresh Design. She does all the amazing client and model photography for just everybody around Syracuse, whether or not it's models or people looking for headshots or products. She is a product photographer working with 1911, with Beacon Skiff, with Glazed and Confused. Just a master behind the lens, and she's going to share her story about coming from Alabama to Syracuse in order to reach international prowess with her photography. So if you're somebody who is interested in digging into the art behind the lens, this is an episode for you. Equally, if you're looking for more storytelling, I have a phenomenal back catalog of episodes that could intrigue you. In this previous episode, episode 45, I'm lucky enough to talk with Daniel Handler, also known as Lemony Snicket, the writers of the A Series of Unfortunate Events books. In episode 42, I talk with science communicator Aaron Owinick Anthony about the way in which we can make science accessible and get people excited about things like zero-gravity flights. Episode 39 is with screenwriter R.C. Matheson talking about his time in Hollywood. And episode 38 is with non-alcoholic beverage advocate Chris Clemens, who also happens to be an awesome local tourism influencer. So if you're somebody who is interested in writing or travel, give those a listen. If you're interested in my work, you can find The World of Ryan Zlomek on Facebook. You can visit @Ryan Zlomek on Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. You can also email me meditations@ryanzlomek.com just to pass along your thoughts. I'm always open to hear them. As always, thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure spending time with you. I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope you go change the world. And don't forget to make space for conversation, because you just might learn something. Until next time, this is Meditations. Thanks so much.